My name is Nenko, and I'm your host. We have here a panel of esteemed best-selling authors. Let me quickly introduce them to you, and then we are going to start the panel. So, give us all a round of applause for our guests. I'm going to start in this direction. So we are welcoming here today Deborah Turner Harris, the author of the Caledon trilogy, the Mages of Garillon series, and best-selling collaborator of Catherine Kurt on the other novels. Is that right? And we have We have her husband here, Robert J. Harris, who is the creator of the beloved Talisman board games and the sequel Mythica. Also writer of numerous series for all ages, historical fiction, mysteries, you name it. Then we have Kevin J. Anderson, author of the Seven Suns Saga, co-writer of all the Dune sequels, contributor to beloved sci-fi universes such as Star Wars, Star Trek, StarCraft, The X-Files, author of all of them, 190 titles under his belt. And last but not least, we have Fonda Lee, of the Green Bone Saga, which I think many of you have heard of. Okay, so the topic of today's panel is a curious one, because it's about nations that we are able to get to know, we are able to believe in their existence, and still they exist only in the world of fiction. So I think that we couldn't have a better panel for a topic like that. Everyone here, probably you are familiar with at least some of the titles our guests have written. Many of them are translated into Polish. So my first question is, I'm gonna repeat myself because we already discussed that on another panel, but today the internet, for example, can get very toxic. Criticism can be really severe. So how do you deal with stuff like, oh, you exploited a culture or you exploited a nation in order to create your own world of fiction? Instead of inventing, you just borrowed from my cultural legacy, for example.
We're all borrowing from everything. Artists are borrowing constantly. We're borrowing from real life, we're borrowing from history, we are borrowing from other writers, media, films. So this idea that, oh, you have stolen, material, it doesn't hold much water. That said, I think it's incumbent upon us as writers, when we do write from a place of inspiration by a real world people or cultures or time period, to do so with not only the best of intentions, but the greatest amount of thought, deliberation, research, and care. So we are, when we do borrow, we need to be borrowing as best as we can. But I think that, one way to, your question was, well, how do you avoid those sorts of seeing those sorts of criticisms? Well, one way is to block Goodreads and to not read your reviews. That's one way to do it. And the reality is, nothing that you write is going to please everyone, right? No matter what you do, someone is going to have some thing to pick at.
So all of you guys have been in Poland for already a couple of days. What would you borrow from Poland? Let's say that you're about to create a fictional nation, borrowing something from your Polish experience.
The land that makes the pork cutlets that we keep eating. It's an entire nation that just produces the worldwide supply. Anyway, I want to echo what Fonda said, though, that it's worse now than it has ever been, that somebody will find a way to hate whatever you're doing. No matter what you do, somebody will hate it. But you know what? That person's never going to buy my book, so I don't care what they think. I care what the readers think, and the ones that like my books and the ones that keep coming back because they enjoy what I've created. And if you're going to create, rewriting an epic fantasy, that you draw your own map, because Tolkien drew maps, so now we all have to draw maps. And you borrow from some configurations of the planet Earth. And Middle Earth and Westeros and I forget the name of the country in all the Terry Goodkind books, but they're all basically white European countries. And you draw from that. Or you can draw from, I've been to Central America and the Mayan temples and the Inca ruins and stuff, and so I've got some Inca and Mayan cultural background. They've got some cool things that you can borrow from. I've been to China, I've been to Bali, I've been to Saudi Arabia, I've been to Dubai. All of those places have interesting cultures that, because they're so strikingly different, they're fascinating to me, and I can borrow that because I'm creating a fantasy world or a science fiction world, and I can make up and draw whatever I want. And what a lot of people will tell you is to be careful. Whatever you're doing, make sure that you're respectful of whatever the elements you're drawing from, which is good. But there are times where you want to draw from something that is negative, that you don't like. So if I was doing creating a world that was based on the repressive, darkest times of Stalin in the Soviet Union, I'm not going to make that rosy and beautiful. That's what I'm drawing from. So you do what the story requires, and you make it your own world, and you just have to develop it and make it real and make it consistent and tell a good story. And if you do your job right, then the readers will like it.
And Kevin, to be fair, I think there's a distinction between saying I'm going to take inspiration from Stalinist Russia, and the negative aspects of that, and stereotyping all Russian people as being evil, right? There's a big difference there. And not all readers can distinguish that, but most of them can.
When I'm thinking of like Maiden the Merciless from Flash Gordon, well, okay, maybe I wouldn't want to do that.
Yeah, I to get back to it was mentioned earlier about the kind of toxic stuff online. Some years back, I was saying a lot of this, slagging off people, nations, cultures. And so my answer to it was to satirize it by doing posts where I was attacking the Etruscans. The Etruscans were a civilization in Italy before the Romans, and so naturally they're pretty harmless, but I got pictures of Etruscan friezes and I had things like, I don't want Etruscans living next door to me, have you ever watched them eat? And then my favourite was, Etruscan and proud, you shouldn't be. And my idea was that you people who are attacking real people saying stuff like this, yeah, can you see now how stupid it is to do that? I mean, if I say about a civilization that's not existed for a couple of thousand years, doing it with people around now is actually even more stupid. So that was my answer to that. And just a little bit, I have collaborated with David on some of the writing, but mostly I'm here because of Talisman. But in that, it was deliberately kind of generic. None of the characters have names in it, none of the places have names. They're like the city, the village, and all this. And the nice thing with that is it allowed people to do their own stuff, that they could make up their own things. And in Poland, they specifically decided to just steal the game entirely. And they basically called it Magic Sword, did their own artwork, did that, and that produced like people. Yeah, that's great. And it was a bootleg copy of the game. I didn't realise that until I got here. I thought they'd paid licensing money for it. But we met somebody just last night, and he said the artwork in the Polish version of the bootleg Polish version of Talisman inspired me to do art. That's what you could do in those little cards and things. And so I've seen the versions of it now, and so in a way, by actually making it, in a sense, culturally neutral, people could add their own stuff, they could do their own versions of it, so that, you know, there are like Star Wars, Harry Potter versions of all, because the basic game was open for that, and so in a sense it's like it's got bits and pieces of all mythologies in it, and leaving it wide open. In a way, by making the game culturally neutral, it means it belongs to the people who play it and to do what they want with it. And that's a minor perspective on the whole issue. I'm sure my wife Debbie has something really much more interesting to say about this.
Not really, but I'll put in my 2 cents worth anyway. A number of years ago, a term came up, cultural misappropriation. And the presumption was that you could only write about or perform music of your own ethnic background. So if you were African American, you couldn't sing German Lieder. Or if you were, white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, you couldn't play blues because you were misappropriating someone else's culture. And all you have to do to explode this is to listen to some white blues players and listen to someone like Jesse Norman singing, who's black and is the most amazing soprano voice. I think it might be helpful to talk about not necessarily borrowing or stealing when you take inspiration from cultures you've encountered other than your own, but to talk about paying tribute to them by paying attention to the aspect, all that's wonderful about them, or not so wonderful as the case may be, and exploring them in interesting ways. You don't deface a culture by engaging with it. And fiction writers, and fantasy writers, science fiction writers, it's all about making discoveries and syntheses, and that can never be bad if it's done with respect.
I really want to jump in on that though, because if you only do the stuff you've always ever done and you can't do anything else, that's called stagnation. And cross-pollination, by mixing the different cultures, is where all the really creative and interesting stuff comes from. I mean, rock and roll music came from a bunch of white guys listening to black jazz music and doing their own thing. And they created something different. And I love to be inspired by other cultures and other things that I've learned, because it makes me think in ways that I didn't think before. And that's what leads to stories. And I've always thought that, like, science fiction is a conversation. So I'm not ripping somebody off if I read their book and I went, that's a cool idea, but I'm going to do it this way. Because that's how you come up with creative stories, rather than just, I can only write the same thing that I did before, or I can only write stories based on my personal experience because I haven't experienced everything. I want to make things up.
Well, the reality is that we have the luxury, the gift of writing speculative fiction and setting our stories in secondary fantasy worlds or other planets. And so that's kind of the means by which we can mix and match all sorts of things that we have in our own world. Strangely enough, sometimes certain readers really want a clear-cut answer when there isn't one. And I think I may face this even more as like a racial minority, because we have all sorts of fantasy worlds that are kind of some mix of European nations. And yet when I wrote the Green Bone Saga, some people were like, well, what's this based on? Is it Taiwan? Is it Japan? Is it China? Is it like, what is it? And I was like, it's none of those. It's a mix, right? Like, I deliberately wanted to create a world that felt as though it was East Asian, in its essence, but is not a specific place. It's not Tokyo, it's not Singapore, Hong Kong, or Taipei. It's its own thing. It's John Lennon, it's a fictional world, and I'm drawing inspiration from other places. But sometimes readers get hung up on it. They're like, well, you know, is it 1970? Is it 1960? What city is it? And if I wanted to write a specific place, I would have written realistic fiction. I want to be a fantasy writer because I want to be able to change and blend and add.
Some readers can be, there's a minority of readers who are more exacting in terms of your world than you are. And they get annoyed if they see holes in your continuity where you didn't see a hole yourself. So you get letters, you get communications from people saying, but you know, and it wasn't relevant to the story. It doesn't affect the characters. I'll go away and think about it if it becomes relevant in the next book that it has set here. Case in point, I ran across this a while back now, but it had to do with The Hobbit. And somebody was fretting over the fact that the Shire doesn't have an actual economic base. You know, there's no evidence of banking or, you know, what the units of trade are or anything else. Who worries about stuff like that?
I actually do.
Well,
Yeah, I know. Yeah,
I knew they'd fall out eventually. I mean, it's happened sooner than I thought, though.
I've wondered things like, well, how are the orcs paid?
blood.
They're just groups. They're just
Meat,
groups.
I guess. Meat is back on the menu. Which also begs the question, how does an orc even know what a menu is?
Did the orc ask that question though? So but that kind of leads to something that when I was younger reading all this stuff, I read Lord of the Rings for the first time and just, oh, this is the best thing ever. And then I read Dune for the first time and, oh, that's the best thing ever. And I love these things. And it was, I think, the second or third time that I read Dune, that there's this just kind of a line in the corner where the Harkonnens have set up this huge operation to come and take over Arrakeen and overthrow House Atreides, and they're going to take over the planet Arrakis, which is it's based on the spice and all that stuff. And the Baron makes this comment, because he's bringing in 3 legions of Sardaukar and all these ships. And the Baron says, we're going to have to triple spice production for the next 100 years just to pay for this war. And I'm like this college kid, and I went, wait, what? You have to pay for a war? And it never occurred, and I literally went to, well, how did Sauron pay the orcs? And Tolkien never, they just magically had all this armor, they magically had all these swords,
That's what I'm saying!
And when you see this giant army of orcs, and they're all in Mordor, which is a crappy place, it's a desert. So
No
how are you
resources there.
feeding these orcs? And who's like, do we have like caravans that are bringing, well, I don't think the orcs eat wheat, so where are they being fed? And I just stopped and I thought, well, this doesn't make any sense anymore.
It doesn't. I think though there is a kind of point to be taken away from all of this, which is when you're world building, and we're talking about creating a fictional world, some of you in the audience may be writers who are in the process of building your own world. Not every part of the world has to be filled in, right? Like, as a writer, you pick and choose where you want to develop your worlds to make them compelling and believable to the reader. But you are not an expert in literally everything, right? Like, I am a business major, and so when I build my fictional worlds, it's important to me that the economy works. Like, I think about these things. Tolkien was not an economist, but he was a linguist. So he spent an inordinate amount of time developing something like 10 different languages.
Elvish songs.
Elvish songs. How many Elvish songs are in Lord of the Rings? And it's because that is something that he has a personal expertise in. And he's put that into his world and developed one part of the world in great detail. And that allows you to believe in the world because the level of specificity makes you think, well, if it exists in this area of the world, it exists everywhere in the world, even when it doesn't really. So you only need to show the parts of the world that are relevant to your story, and you don't need to develop everything to the same level of detail because it's impossible.
Well, and the character though too, and to the Hobbit and Lord of the Rings point, I don't think Bilbo Baggins was the economist of the Shire. And he probably didn't know what the economic basis of it was. He just sat on and smoked his pipe. And
Maybe there was, but, you know,
I don't even know
took
what
him-
he did
yeah.
for a job. How did he, or Frodo, what did they do? I mean, they worked the cobbler. Did it ever say what they did for a job? They just happened to sit in their hobbit house. All right, I mean, found money, I guess, but that's the part too, is that if you have an assistant paykeeper as your main character, the assistant paykeeper isn't going to go on and ruminate for 5 pages on the economic basis of the Shire, because that's not of concern. So that's what you have to deal with in your story, is look through the eyes of your character and see the world through their eyes. One of the examples I often use is, because I write science fiction, and science fiction people often tend to over-explain the science when it doesn't need to be there. And
How
you-
does the fast
Yes.
person
Well,
life drive work? They want to know those
yeah,
things sometimes.
well, what I like to go is like, so if you have this young lady who is going on a date with her boyfriend that night, and she is in the morning, she gets her coffee and she puts it in the microwave, and she's just washed her hair and she's ready to go on her date, and she puts the coffee in the microwave. You do not need to say that the microwave has a microwave range raised that accelerates the water molecules, and the friction heats up the coffee so that it makes it hot and the thermal energy comes out. And then this girl takes the coffee out and goes, drinks it, then goes and gets in her car. And then she turns the ignition in her car, at which point the internal combustion engine presses the gas. And she doesn't know this stuff, and she doesn't care. She just wants to turn on the car. So science fiction writers, you don't need to explain how a microwave works, and you don't need to explain how an internal combustion engine works.
You don't even have to, is this working?
No.
Is it working now?
I'll give you mine.
Oh,
Oh, no, there you go.
oh, thank you very much.
Yeah, okay, is that better?
Yeah.
Yeah, but you don't have, if it's fantasy, you don't have to explain in detail how the magic works. Now, you have to have a certain understanding from the writer's perspective, but that doesn't mean you need pages of exposition. Exposition, when it's visible from space, interferes with the narrative, it interferes with the characterization. So, as Fonda said, I mean, there's not, some aspects of your world only need to be explained when they become story relevant or character relevant. Before that, you can just leave it, because the need to explain these things will manifest at the appropriate time. You have to trust your own imagination, your own intuition, and your own critical sense of what's important to the narrative.
Yeah, I know if I was frozen suspended animation and I was awoken hundreds of years in the future, and they said, oh good, now we can find out all about the 21st century from this guy. And they'll say, Bob, how did the internet work? I don't know, we just clicked something, you know. It's all those great bridges. How when you're building the bridge, it's going to collapse halfway across the river. I said, yeah, that's right, I don't know how they did that. So most of us would have no idea how to explain these things. So in a story, of course, as has been said, the characters are not going to be reflecting on these things. They're going to be as ignorant as we are. Although there's certain things we should know how they work. You know, I mean, how can you just make a dragon, make your toast?
Do what you want.
Yeah, there must be some reason it does that. But I think most of us would have a very hard time explaining our culture. So if you're right about our day, we would not be able to even try to. Not only would we not get time to explain these things, we literally couldn't explain them because we don't have the engineering background or whatever else. And so in a story, it needs to be on that level that the people in those things don't need to explain things to other people. In fact, interestingly, I read a review I'm reading a lot of Japanese murder mysteries these days. I won't apologise for that. And you get interesting insights into their culture. But I read a review of one, and one of the criticisms was that there's an American girl who goes to visit this Japanese friend of hers, and of the Japanese family having this big family thing, and people start getting murdered over some inheritance thing or something. And then there's people who said, in the Japanese, this American girl didn't exist. The translator invented her and put her into the story to explain to the reader all the Japanese stuff that was going on in it. They wouldn't know it otherwise. Which seems an extreme thing. Maybe a few footnotes would have done the trick, but it's usually a whole new character to explain things. But it's that thing of reading, a translation of a novel from another culture. It's like, how far are people going to explain to you, when this kind of ceremony means this or something like that. But you do pick up a lot of interesting things about, like, one they just set at Christmas time, and it's just a big house, these Japanese people, they've got a Christmas tree, they listen to Bing Crosby singing White Christmas. I never knew they did that. And, they celebrate Christmas. So it's so the whole notion of how you put over a culture in things without beating people over the head with it is part of the art of it. I remember reading something about Robert Heinlein, where they said, even just read these things in, you're reading this story, and you're going to pick up all this stuff about this future world that's about. You're not going to feel that it's being pushed into your face. It's going to be dropped in by bits and bits in the course of it, things characters say. And of course, that's really good writing to do that, rather than saying, no, the first spaceship that landed on Mars was in, going on, and then they built a colony on this. No, they just got this colony here and all that. So, yeah.
Possibly science fiction, fantasy, comic, readers who come to conventions like this are exceptionally good at just interpreting things, taking it in stride, accepting the clues that come their way. That you guys don't demand fiddly little explanations for everything that happens, because what is appealing to you is the total package of the world that you're reading about. In the case of putting this intrusive foreign character into this Japanese mystery, I would have been interested to see how I would have reacted if she hadn't been there. I think I probably would have coped. Readers cope. Give your readers credit for having a fair bit of intelligence and affinity for what's going on. Give them a stake in helping you tell the story. And it's a conversation, as you were saying.
Yeah, when I teach about world building, one of the things that I frequently say is that fantasy and science fiction readers, they want to figure it out. And think about it like visiting a foreign country. You could take them on a guided tour in a shaded bus and say, well, this is this, and this is this, and point things out and explain it. And that's boring, right? You want to bring your reader into the fantasy world the way that you would a foreign exchange student in a homestay. Right? You drop them in, and you place them with a family, or in this case, the characters, and they have to figure it out through context, how things work. But there are tricks as a writer that you have to be able to show the world and explain the world in a non-intrusive way that doesn't feel like it's heavy-handed. And a few of those are, first, you can have the character who's sort of outside, right? This is why the fish out of water trope is so well worn, is you have that character who is also unfamiliar with the world and is sort of a stand-in for the reader in some way, who needs some things explained to them when they encounter something unfamiliar. The other is to have things break, right? Like Kevin said, we never think about how our car engine works until it stops working, and then we have to take it to the shop and we have to learn what is wrong with the car. We don't think about how our microwave works until the microwave breaks. So if you do need to explain how the spaceship works, the best way to do that is to have something go wrong. And then that gives the engineers and the captain and so on some opportunity to explain things that they wouldn't otherwise be talking about in the course of their normal day-to-day lives.
So when you create a nation, what's your favorite thing to describe? Is it the social order? Is it the authority, the economy? Is it their system of education? Or is it just bringing believability through emotional believability? Like if the human experience of the population of this nation is believable enough, we can relate to them no matter how strange they are.
I love creating the little textural day-to-day details of the world. So names are a lot of fun for me. I love naming the cars, the restaurants, the titles of the people. The names are so evocative. I love describing the food and the idioms, like how people greet each other, their turns of phrase. So the little things that make the world feel lived in are the funnest part. Of course, there are the big picture things that have to be there: the government, the economy, the political situation, the matches. Yes, all of that has to be in place. But when it comes down to it, it's those little day-to-day details that I love.
I love to remembering that as writers we have an unlimited special effects budget. And so I can describe the most awesome, kick-ass, beautiful, huge canyons and tree cities filled with intelligent lemurs and all kinds of stuff like that, because we don't have to worry about how you're gonna make it in a movie. That's what James Cameron's job is. So I can describe whatever I want, and I love to come up with exotic cities, exotic living systems. I did, because I worked with Star Wars for so long, and I did this big illustrated art book about all the one chapter for each planet, whether it's Dagobah or Hoth or Bespin, and just taking that, okay, this is the ice planet, so what's the whole ecosystem and what kind of creatures live there? Because it's, and Frank Herbert did that in Dune, it's not just a big desert that has worms in it, because the worms it's a life cycle, they have to feed on something, and so he developed this entire sand plankton and all kinds of stuff that isn't like in your face in the book, but it's there because he built the entire the science and ecosystem in it. And I like just taking something and running with it. And when I was doing this with the Star Wars universe, I rapidly figured out that George Lucas hadn't done that. Because there's no such thing as a swamp planet. You can't have a planet that's a swamp the whole way around.
No planet is a monobiome.
Yeah, a blank. Now, sure, that's just, we only looked at the swamp part of it, but anyway. So you have to develop other things with it, and I come up with interesting life forms, and I used to love doing all the National Geographic things, to look at all the weird insects and birds and creatures here on this planet, and I'm like, I can't make up anything as crazy as that stuff. And like if I made up the duck-billed platypus, people would laugh me out of literature because that just seems too ridiculous. And I like to run with that, but then once you develop this ecosystem, what sort of people would live there and what cultures would they develop, and like in Dune, for instance, the Fremen have something like 20 words for different kinds of sand and dunes and things. So that's how you develop it. And for world building, I think the best thing is you just ask the next question and get that answer, then ask the next question after that. You keep asking it. And as you build up all these descriptive things, then your story emerges from it because, oh, I want a character that does that, and I want a character who's in charge of that, and that's what the whole story gets put together with.
Yeah, I mean, my perspective on it is a bit different, although it occurs to me really that when you talk about doing fantasy or science fiction, you have to put your world over. When you do historical fiction, you have to do the same thing. You can't assume your readers all have degrees in medieval history. You've got to, in the same way, with some subtlety, put over what the culture is like at that time, that people are. One thing that always struck me, my second solo published novel was about the teenage William Shakespeare and his adventures. And this is about the things you leave out of the book. In those days, people would dress up, men would dress up with enormous codpieces, these huge things would stick out in front of them, these fake things. But people were huge, and vast ruffs, these huge lace things around them. And I think if I describe people dressed like this in this book, I'm just going to think, what are these people like? They must be mad. So I just left all that out and think, well, just imagine they're all dressed quite simply. I know Debbie's got more interesting things to say than me, but I know that I'm very aware of when she started writing a fantasy, she modelled herself very much on Dorothy Dunnett, who wrote very successful, very popular historical novels. And that was in a sense like the model for it. That this is how you tell this kind of a story, although rather than being an actual historical place, it's a fantasy invented place. But the techniques you have to use to put that over are very, very similar. Isn't that right?
Yes, now I will elaborate. I'm working in the same sort of vein as you suggested, Fonda. It's a question of putting over ambience. If character X gets up in the morning, what is he or she, what is his ordinary experience going to be? If he's poor, does he go through and scrabble around for the last remaining piece of bread or whatever substitute for bread? If he walks outside of wherever he lives, what does he see? What do you smell? If he lives by the ocean, is there a smell of rotten fish? I find sensory issues very interesting to explore as part of the texturing process. With my Garillon books, when the first one was reviewed in Locus, the reviewer paid me the compliment of now, the reviewer said, too many cliffhangers, and it was going galloping away. But I was very much complimented by the fact that this Garillon was described as a lived-in world and a lively one. So I evidently did something right. And I think, in retrospect, from a critical perspective, it is this sort of daily life, ordinary experience at the ground level, and then as the character moves around and things start happening, the world unpacks, or you unpack it for your reader. But starting from small things and building and building, as characters make discoveries, readers do as well.
And see, now I'm stuck on, I want to do an entire story about the giant cod pieces. And they all have very small hands. And just like, if I've got a detail like that, there's no way it's going to get left out.
I would like to ask you guys, has your writing changed throughout the years? Because the audience changes, and I think nowadays, at least for me, I think we have so much more sources of information, and our visual culture is so much richer than before. So I guess that if you're an imaginative viewer, reader, whatever you name it, you have the ability to imagine a certain nation with less description. And sometimes you would read through an older novel where everything is described into excruciating detail. For the time, readers were just blown away, like, oh my God, all the details are there. All of it is so well thought out. But now it sounds like an RPG source book more than a novel with a plot. So has your writing changed throughout the year, and have you, the years, and have you made it maybe snappier and relying more on the reader's ability to fill in the blanks?
I'll jump in here. This is from the standpoint of having taught literature over a number of years. If you look back to the development of the English novel, the early Gothic novels from which fantasy and science fiction evolved, you get in a lot of these novels very, very detailed descriptions of landscapes and states of experience, sort of psychological experiences, but quite a lot of just sensory detail. And this is because, of course, this is before television and film, so the only way you're going to be able to put over sublime landscapes is with verbal description. So these descriptions are quite dense, and this is not something that we value in modern fiction, and it's not necessary. Because I think as writers, I know my experience of watching films informs how I write scenes. So,
Yeah, I mean, I would say that I don't think my approach has really changed because I've always been very inspired by visual medium. So many of my books actually do pull from cinema in some form. So I really do, in many cases especially, I think the action scenes, the physical combat, and so on, I do see the story unfolding very cinematically, like a movie in my head. And my job as the writer is to transfer that. Yeah, but I also am very aware that I'm not working in a visual medium. Right? I have different tools than a filmmaker. So my job is not to describe everything in excruciating detail. It's to, what I have as a tool is interiority. That's the thing that film can't do, that you can't look at like a TikTok and feel what the person, you know, in the TikTok is feeling. You're not literally in their head. While as with a character, I can put you in that experience. So what I need to lean into is the character and the interiority and their experience, their thoughts and emotions, and the everything else I need to describe in enough detail with enough compelling, vivid language that you do the work as the reader to come along with me.
One of the things that I think has changed over the years is that science fiction itself has evolved and has infiltrated the mainstream so much that I think you've all seen the original Dune movie, the David Lynch one with Sting. That was in 1985, I think, 84. And at the beginning, Princess Irulan comes on and she explains things to you for 5 minutes because at that time, nobody had, other than science fiction nerds, nobody had any clue what folding space was and what navigators and all these different things. And now it's just so clear in our culture that, well, we know what it is and I don't need to explain that. My wife, when she was in college, she wrote a science fiction story for her creative writing class, and her professor dinged her on it because she didn't explain what a laser was. Well, we've taken over the world, guys. Everybody knows what science fiction stuff is. And we can use these, we can use these terms and not have to explain them, which is great, because then we don't have the 10 paragraphs of how a microwave works and stuff, so it's good.
Yeah, like I said, I think we are all influenced by seeing cinema. You know, we can see things, and the influence it had on me, in a sense, is that I had, at one point, when I was a children's writer, that part of my career, which is wonderful, I wrote 3 novels in the Artie Conan Doyle Mysteries, the idea being that young Arthur Conan Doyle, in his early teen years, had all kind of adventures in Victoria and Edinburgh that will inspire the Sherlock Holmes stories later. And I was thinking that maybe I can have a grown-up actual Sherlock Holmes novel. And then I had the idea of taking the Basil Rathbone films. Now, I'd grown up watching those, and I hadn't noticed that they'd moved Sherlock Holmes to London in the 1940s as a propaganda thing. Sherlock Holmes was fighting Nazi spies in London in 1942. And yet it was so well done. Yeah, it was so well done, you didn't really feel a jolt from it at all.
it works a treat.
Yeah, it works a treat, because the actors, Basil Rathbone, to me, the best Sherlock Holmes. But I thought to myself, well, could that work as a novel? You know, this thing that works as cinema, could you do it in a novel? Could you have Sherlock Holmes, you know, during the London blackout? So I wrote Study in Crimson with that. Because the thing with there is, the movie, they just put the actors on, they say their lines, and that's it. In the novel, you've got to think, well, hang on, these guys have got a totally different life leading up to this. They were born much later, and yet they have to be the same characters that you're writing about. It has to still read like Sherlock Holmes and Watson as written by Conan Doyle. But you have to go a bit deeper, deeper even than Conan Doyle does. Like some confusion over Mrs. Watson, whether she's alive or dead in the stories. And so she's dead in this, but I had to go a bit deeper into, you know, how Watson felt about being widowed and such like. So that was like taking something from the cinema and saying, I'm going to take that idea and make it into a novel, but doing it as a novel involved a lot more thought, a lot more background had to go into it so you understand it. And but so there is a back and forth thing now, where you can watch a great movie and think, oh yeah, I'd like to write a story as exciting as that movie. And as I was saying, your special effects budget's unlimited. You can blow up planets and stuff, and you don't need ILM to come in and do it for you. And the last thing I like that's very self-serving is that my latest novel, Crescendo, is a Hitchcockian thriller set in 1959 in Hollywood. And Albert Hitchcock is actually in it. It's so Hitchcockian. And it's got some good reviews, a lot of good reviews come out. And two of them have said it should be made into a movie. One of them said, well, if we did a movie now, then that's full circle. This novel, it's about this movie, it doesn't get made. Can get made into a movie. Another one said, oh, I've said a lot of kind things about it. Said, all I need now is somebody to come along and film it. So yes, let's hope, let's fingers crossed.
It's become an Ouroboros.
Yes.
Unfortunately, our time is up. I know that you're all very disappointed. I would love to stay here all week and just continue the talk.
You could not survive the whole week.
We don't answer. Okay, so that's all for today. Thank you all for coming. Please check the schedule because Kevin has an autograph session. I don't know about the rest of you guys, but Kevin is going to sign.
Please don't make me feel lonely.
At 2:30, I'll be doing a talk on Talisman by board game, which people seem to like.
This is my last event of Pyrkon.
Okay, so goodbye, Fonda. Thank you for being here. It's been a real pleasure and an honor, and I hope you were all entertained and enlightened. See you again.